I'm Jim Check.
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
We're here with Beyond the Ballot, and we're going to talk about, are we in a housing bubble? Well, we'll get to that, though. But first, we're going to talk about a few other things going on, and lots going on, as usual, as Parliament gets set to resume here on September 15th. But, they've been off. I think they're going to sit for a total of 73 days in 2025. Tough work, eh? Tough slugging.
That is abysmal. I mean, if you look at typical parliamentary calendars, they're sitting for between 6 and 8 months. So for them to be sitting for 73 days is absolutely abhorrent. But what also is the case is that they weren't sitting last fall either. So it's been a long time since we've seen any sort of meaningful legislation, other than the legislation that went through that would allow Carney to enact energy projects on the fly, which he has done none of.
Yeah, 75 days. That's our 73 days, total of 73 days. And apparently we're in the worst crisis of our lifetime, but not in a crisis where we need to actually have Parliament in session. It's kind of a weird and wacky for sure. But Pierre Poilievre dropped a big thing today, which is kind of different. He didn't really campaign on this, and he wants to end the temporary foreign worker program, which is going to be kind of like controversial for some people, especially in the Okanagan here when we talk about the agricultural programs.
There will be, and this is a dangerous one for him to walk out for a number of reasons. One is Canadians have become accustomed to a certain level of income, and the farming jobs that are prolific here in the Okanagan, or certain jobs in the lower socioeconomic income levels, are not going to be wildly picked up. We have this huge unemployment rate in youth, but a large number of those, and I think that there needs to be more study done, but I think a large number of those are actually still living with mom and dad. So, when you start looking at how much is someone willing to go to work for, I think that there might be a real issue with the societal norm that Canadian youth have become accustomed to.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough one.
And he's looking at, foreign workers are taking our jobs, but when you look at where those foreign workers are located, you'd be hard pressed to make an income that would pay for rent, etc.
Yeah, it's going to be a tougher one for him. I know there's a lot of, outcry for it as well because of, the crime that's running rampant, and then, the high unemployment for youth and that. So, but, somewhere in there is a compromise, I think. But, they just need to find that compromise, because runaway immigration, which we've seen in the Trudeau Liberals, and looks like it's happening right now with the Carney Liberals, is, led to the health crisis, the, housing crisis, and all these different crises. And, but I'm just not sure ending it completely is going to be the solution.
Well, and what Poilievre is trying to draw attention to is another failed promise by the Carney government. Carney promised to get immigration under control. The numbers that just came out, a week ago show that it's the temporary foreign worker numbers that have gone rampant, and we've got over 400 of them that have arrived, 400,000, sorry, I should say, that have arrived. And so this is an easy number for Poilievre to draw attention to and to really make a point about. Is this a policy that a Conservative government would implement if they were the ones that were leading right now? I think it would be harder to do, and harder to do on our economy. You're talking about food, that our food inflation still is escalating. We haven't seen that come under control, and when you're paying for farm workers at Canadian wages, that's a lot harder to do.
And then when we talk about housing, we're seeing, especially in the bigger markets, Toronto, Vancouver, we're seeing those small condos just fall off a cliff, and there's just tons of inventory sitting there, prices are falling, and then people are now getting sued, and they're trying to get out of their, especially on these builds that are 2-3 years away, and it's kind of like a bit of a catastrophe in those markets, especially in those markets, and even sales are slower here in the Okanagan.
What we're seeing is the ramifications of policy that was enacted before development was completed. So we have a large number of smaller inventory units that are really not conducive to, your average Canadian or even immigrant wanting to live in that unit because they're just simply too expensive. Large number of concrete, where you're talking $1,200 to $1,500 a square foot. So even though it's only 300, 400 square feet, it's still astronomically expensive. With these units, they were largely intended for Airbnbs. I was saying right before the show that, when was the last time you saw a hotel, a hotel tower go up in either Toronto or Vancouver? It's been a long time because the Airbnb market was way more accessible and far more advantageous for the average traveler to utilize. And not just traveler in terms of short term, but whether it was medical traveler, whether it was student, whether it was, someone coming in for a locum, etc., that was far, far more advantageous to use the Airbnbs. Government changed that. And when government changed that, you have a large number of units that nobody really wants. So why do we have a glut of condos in Toronto when we have a housing crisis? Because the market doesn't want the type of condo that was constructed in that era. And these buildings and these towers were largely planned for 7-8 years ago and are now coming to occupancy. So we're seeing the effects of a change in government policy on where we're at today. I think that it would be wise for government to take heed because we have, tourism numbers going down. People are not spending as much when they do travel, and largely because it's so expensive. I mean, to come to Kelowna, if you want to, spend a week at a Best Western, you might be looking at, a few $1,000s. And if you have to get 2 rooms for you and your family, because you've got 3 kids, now you're talking about several $1,000s. That leaves very little expendable cash for those. For those other extraneous meals out or, trips on the floating playground that's the women.
Right. I had it right there on the tip of my tongue, and yeah,
but anyway,
I don't know.
it really sabotages a family that wants to travel. So we need to seriously take a look at this. We need to take a look at it for our economy. We need to take a look at it because it's not affecting our rental the way that we thought it would. We've got enough purpose-built rental that is accommodating right now.
Yeah, the purpose-built rentals here in Kelowna now, you've been building some of them as well, and we're starting to see a vacancy rate that is palatable for most people. Like we're seeing 5-6%, I think, and there's talk the city of Kelowna might look at trying to exit the Airbnb policy here that was put out by the province, because there's, in those purpose-built, they were zoned, sold as Airbnb properties, and those, they're not even selling those out right now. So some of them are still sitting, like some of those properties, Aqua and different things, there's inventory that's sitting for a couple of years. Well, Ballot still has inventory. There's a number of properties out there where they used to sell out in a day or two. Those investors have basically put their money back in their pockets, and some haven't even closed on the properties. I've heard from people that they couldn't close.
Well, investors are, the same investor that's a small mom and pop, operation who are just looking for a little retirement income. That same exit strategy that can be used for them in terms of an Airbnb or long-term rental, that same exit strategy is what an investor is looking for when they go into a large project at the beginning. And when you pull out the exits, you don't have as many investment dollars that go into any project. So the development industry as a whole is on its knees. And the difference here, Jim, is that this is not the global crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, when you literally saw a 10-month blip for Vancouver or Toronto. This is not COVID, where you saw, a 10-week slowdown and then construction resume and the market take off. This is catastrophic. We have seen at least an 18-month slowdown, maybe not perceptible to the general public because they still saw occupancies coming on stream. But if you look at housing start numbers, we are way down from where we should be. We're looking at 2016 to 2019 numbers. Those are not numbers that we should be proud of right now, and it's going to take us a long time to dig out of that when we do want to provide housing for individuals. But I also think that, cities need to take heed. This is not the type of housing that people want. It's not the type of housing that people are buying. So we need to adjust policy based on Airbnbs are that, So, use them for Airbnbs in locations that are conducive, i.e. your downtown cores or your tourism zones. But then look at, what do people need to live? They want, ground oriented townhome slash, duplex product and single family product, which, City of Kelowna said no to over the course of the last years.
Yeah, and people don't realize that when the government sticks its paw into something and says it's going to fix something, that all the kind of like consequences of those actions. Because if we look at Airbnb and they forced those Airbnbs, which were sold as Airbnbs, zoned as Airbnb, and then they say, no, those have to be rentals now. And then some people couldn't close, they lost their money, and then it drives investment dollars away. But it also increases the inventory when a developer like you is building rental, purpose-built rentals at the same time. And there's been that huge kind of like build on that. Then all of a sudden it takes away from that too, because all of a sudden, like you're getting vacancy rates that are getting higher and higher. And that makes you say, well, maybe we don't put another project online right now because there's, the vacancy rates creeping up to a point where we can't cover our capital costs.
Yeah, and the vacancy rate right now, 3 to 5% is a healthy city. So we're actually celebrating the fact that we've seen the vacancy rate go up. Do we want to see it, 9 or 10? No. Could it go to 9 or 10? Possibly in the next little while. But there's lots being talked about in terms of incentives. Incentives are very common in other areas, whether it's the prairies or whether it's, smaller communities. So incentives are not abnormal, especially for a larger building that's trying to fill up. But, anytime we prescribe uses and, and really narrow the scope or the uses, it really doesn't allow development to adjust to what the market is demanding and to what, to where we see the needs are. So I think that anytime that we get, these can only be Airbnbs or these can only be purpose-built rentals, it's a little bit dicey. Where I think the government has done a good job is on the purpose-built rental aspect. Buildings and institutional buildings that can remain in perpetuity as a rental is a really good thing for a city. That allows a tenant to know that they're going to have, a moderated increase over the course of however many years they choose to live there, and that they know it's going to be a rental for as long as they require it. That gives a lot of stability to a community, to a society, and to an economy. And we definitely need more of that as we move forward. The scary part is CMHC has already changed their financing as of July 18th, and it looks like we're going to see purpose-built rentals, basically the window of opportunity closed.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Doug Ford, is he the biggest populist entertainer in Canada? Because he was dumping out that bottle of Crown Royal there, just plays to the crowds. Eh? And how about embarrassing when he didn't even take out the slow pour in there and he's trying to shake it out, right? Talk about a failed event there, right? But he doesn't realize though that Crown Royal or the manufacturers have lots of other Canadian employees. They're only moving one plant south, and it has to do with costs that they're facing, nothing to do with dissing on Canada. But Doug Ford loves to play to the media, and they were lapping it up.
Well, I think that Doug Ford is using a very small, and as you mentioned, they're still doing a lot of other bottling here in Canada, but a very small closure to draw attention to a larger issue. I think Pierre Poilievre did that in his press conference when he talked about the 16,000 lost jobs in Ontario. That's a huge number. And what Doug Ford has not done is try and prop up those employment numbers by using government funds, which I think is a wise call on his part. That's exactly what BC has done, is just hire more public servants and try and skew the numbers, as it were, which is a dangerous game when you're talking about inflation and spending. And we're going to hear more about that in 12 short days when they do the financial update for BC. But I do think Ron Butler actually had a phenomenal take on this whole issue, which is, he's saying we need to be careful with foreign ownership because foreign owners don't value our communities in the same way that we do. Now, I don't feel the same way that he does, in that, I think that the market, if we provided the same tax incentives, if we provided the same, advantageous aspects that the U.S. does, I think that we would see less of those dollars going south. But until we do, and until we get serious about attracting the economic giants that we need up here, we're going to see that, whether it's battery plants going under or whether it's Seagram's not making its crown royal here anymore.
Definitely competition for capital. You and I talk about that all the time. If you don't have an environment where that capital can thrive, it's going to go where it can thrive. I mean, it's basically like a seed. It's going to go where it can find some sunshine and find some water. And if you continue to regulate it and do all those things, especially if you have large amounts of capital, it will go where it is treated the best. That seems like 100%. Common sense, doesn't it?
100%. And I do think that the dialogue that Doug Ford is trying to create is fighting for those jobs. I don't think he's done a great job. He hasn't done a great job in fighting for the steel industry. He hasn't done a great job fighting for the auto industry. He hasn't done a great job in fighting for the Crown Royal industry. And I think that we need to really think through some of these aspects of our economy and to look at, what can we do and how do we move forward. You and I talk about it all the time. Energy is everything, and cheap energy is prosperity.
Yeah, and then let's move on. One of the biggest political, kind of like one of the legs on most political campaigns is definitely crime and safety. And Sean Fraser, I think he made one of his biggest faux pas, and he's made a few, right? He was immigration minister, he was housing minister, and then with crime and safety, we're seeing all these really headline-grabbing stories about like a 5-year-old raped in the bedroom by a repeat offender, and then a father shot in front of his children, and then we're seeing all these really high-profile cases, and then. Sean Fraser coming out and said, this isn't the Wild West, it's Canada. Well, I think Canada needs a new sheriff then, because it seems like it's the Wild West with no sheriff and no marshal.
And that Wild West comment has been obliterated on social media. The number of cases and the number of scenarios that people have brought to the forefront, the ones that you mentioned. I thought it was a toddler. I thought that it was a 3-year-old, but horrific crimes created and done by people that have no business being on our streets. This, Sean, to agree to being, this minister is probably the worst thing that he could ever have chosen. This is not going to go well for him. We need a new sheriff in town for sure, but we need new laws. And, I saw this great graph the other day that was put up. I'll try and put it onto reply. But it basically showed violent crimes going down throughout the last Conservative government. And then there's this mark in the sand. And then from the Liberal government up in terms of number of violent crimes, we simply have a justice system that is so flawed right now, allowing criminals to walk our streets and giving more rights to criminals than to those that are being assaulted. I think that we need a rethink of these laws, and we need to get the laws repealed that have given these bail conditions the way that they have.
Yeah, there was a reaction from the Durham Police Association there saying basically this isn't the Wild West, it's Canada, but he's not so sure. That's what they're saying to the minister because of everything that's going on. And I think, the highlight is this castle law, and we played it many times, is that in Canada, I remember the Toronto police there saying if, just leave your keys at the front door so when people break into your house, they can access your keys really easy so they don't disturb you while you're sleeping. Whereas in Florida, they play a clip there, the sheriff there saying if people break into your house, shoot them dead so you save the taxpayer some money. Because in your castle, that's your domain. So, Pierre Poilievre coming out and saying he wants something similar in Canada, like the castle law, because we saw that guy broke into a house, had a crossbow, and then the homeowner reacted, and he ended up getting charged by the police department. And we'll see what happens in court. But definitely, a person should be able to feel safe in their own home. And I think a lot of people, especially in the bigger cities right now, do not feel safe.
And right now, the police are charging those that are trying to defend, because nobody else is doing anything. There was a store in Kelowna that had been, robbed time and time again. And so finally, one of the managers had enough. And as he saw someone robbing the store, he, and they took off with their backpack, he took off after them. And he literally, got the perpetrator to the ground right out in front of our RCMP office right on Richter and Clement. And out come the police, and he said, like, arrest him. Like, he has all of our stolen goods in his backpack. And they looked at him and said, well, if we arrest him, we have to arrest you because you just assaulted him and pushed him to the ground. That's the state of where we're at right now, and that was one of the issues that I dealt with as an MLA. Like, we are talking about average day citizens who are trying to defend themselves right now because they simply are not being defended by our laws. And when we get into that situation, they're the ones that are being charged. So I do think we have a really big hill to climb, but it's not an undoable hill. And the one thing I've seen over and over again, and the one thing I'd love for all of the listeners to hear, is this can be changed. And I just don't want people to think this is how we have to live.
Yeah, we played in the really big show this morning. Like we see so many times people going to liquor stores and 3 or 4 people and they just fill up their bags and they leave and they're told not to interfere with them, and the cops, like you said, the cops won't do anything. But there was somebody used an excavator that they borrowed from a construction site, went to the bank and just ripped the wall down and tore out the ATM machine. So is that shoplifting too, or what is that? What is that considered? Because I mean, they're basically stealing the ATM, they're stealing the liquor. So do the cops let that one go as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, very rhetorical. But what happens in these situations is that the organized criminals move in very quickly.
Yeah.
And what you just exemplified was something that goes from petty to organized very quickly, where you have in Calgary or Airdrie 4 homes on the same street that have cars stolen on the same night, where someone actually goes into the house, disconnects the power and takes the keys, and so that the owner is trying to turn the power on rather than chase them. Those are organized criminals. And yeah, you can sell a credit card from the wallet that you stole and get someone charged for it. But ultimately, organized crime is now using petty criminals to do their bidding. And we see the massive amounts of cars being shipped overseas, and we see the organized criminals profiting from it. And yeah, we haven't seen our laws change to actually kind of nip this in the bud.
This is a story you and I've talked about before, and this is Scott McInnes, MLA there in the Revelstoke area, bringing it to the attention, the Cowichan decision on the land there in Richmond. And he's written a letter to Ottawa asking for that the Supreme Court get involved in this, because right now if they try to sell that land, Cowichan's on title. And it's almost like, it's that land has a cloud over it, and it's almost like unsellable at this point.
It's paralytic. Yeah, there is absolutely nothing you can do. We don't have precedents for it. We don't know. I mean, how is the Cowichan going to actually do a land title change? They don't have a land titles office. They're not, sophisticated enough or have the capacity, to deal with these types of transactions. So it becomes dead in the water. This is a really dangerous precedent. You and I have discussed this. I saw one of the commentators, basically legal commentators, say, the ultimate outcome of this is that there is no Canada. There are no laws. There is no, there is no ability to move forward. We have to find a way to create reconciliation that's outside of this type of extremism, and the government doesn't have enough money to buy it all back. So there has to be a way forward, and I'm not sure that the court system in BC is the one to try and figure that out. I do think that this is a Supreme Court of Canada decision. I think that Scott is on the right track. However, this is a little bit more about political theater because he can't really call on the Supreme Government to hear the case. That would be up to the justices in the Supreme Court of BC to basically either turn it over to Supreme Court of Canada, or for the government of Canada to say, this one we're going to ask the justice system to weigh in on.
And I think this is a Canada-wide type story. There is some places that have treaties in place, but BC doesn't have a lot of that. And then the lawyer that I interviewed is like 33 years experience in Aboriginal law, said that the NDP purposely didn't argue extinguishment on private land, and that was an ideological choice that the NDP has made. And they may have created a really big mess here for Canada. Like, you know what I mean? Like faith, because like those people on that land right now, there's two people on title, really. Like, and how do you sell that land? Like, even if like they say the property is worth $1 million, would you buy it for 250? Probably not, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's unsellable.
No. I mean, the best you could do is probably lease it. But even leasing it, who does the lease payments go to? Like, it's a very, very convoluted situation right now. I know that even the bands are the different nations are at argument over who should actually own that. Whether it's the Musqueam who say, that's actually our traditional territory, or whether it's like, they were all, arguing in that same court case. So I think we have a long road to climb, but until that final decision is rendered, I think we have some very serious murky waters to get through.
I have Brendan Day in tomorrow, MLA. He's the health critic for rural hospitals, and it's going to be an interesting discussion because we're still seeing those ER closures here in British Columbia, especially in the rural communities. And then this Renee Gasper put this out saying that in 2024, October 8th, EB vowed every British Columbian wants a family doctor and will have one by the end of 2025. And the latest report shows 1.37 million people still waiting. And then that's just another promise that I don't think the NDP are going to be able to deliver on. We're running out of time.
No, this is not something that will age well for the NDP. They are in trouble on the health file. They're in trouble with the healthcare workers. They're in trouble with with the patients. They're in trouble with the care that they're providing. They're in trouble. Like it's on every front. And the amalgamation of the mental health and substance use, I think, is also really troubling for this file. And Josie Osborne, I don't see a way through for her. You're going to see her remain very on point. She's going to stay on message, but you're not going to see a lot of dramatic moves. I mean, so far, really the only thing that we've seen of any magnitude has been the PHSA when they came in to do an audit. Penny Ballum has let some administrators go, but it really hasn't been anything consequential and nothing that's going to actually balance the books or make it or really affect patient outcomes.
Also did an interview with the president of the BIABC from Kamloops there, Jeremy Heighton, and he talked about, like 1 in 5 businesses in British Columbia might not make the next 6 months, and that 67% of them say that crime and safety is their biggest concern, and they've basically had enough and they want some action. So then we got comments from, the mayor of Kelowna, and also we got a comment from the BC NDP, and then from Gavin Dew. But, I'm trying to get an interview with Terry Young. He's the community safety minister, and I'm getting a lot of runaround, but hopefully I get that interview. He's a former police officer as well. So, because that is one that I think businesses in BC have kind of like faced the brunt of that themselves. And I can remember being a business owner downtown, when you call and they say, well, that's your problem. That's it. That's in your doorstep. That's private property, apparently. And, we did lots of stories on like a pizza place that had its front window broken out 3 times in a month. It's $1,000 window, and the deductible obviously is $5,000. So, I mean, you got to sell a lot of pizzas to make up for that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I would say that the having a building downtown over the course of the last 12 years has definitely changed. We used to have open doors. We used to have reception areas that you could walk into. You go to every single floor on our building, and it's under full lockdown with reception pads or doorbells on the outside of these. Everything gets locked down every single night. We do a clean sweep of the stairwells before we go home at night. There's a very different energy to being downtown. I mean, we have staff that won't walk alone to the parking. So it definitely has affect. And it's hard because we saw property taxes go way up this last year, and so you're paying literally tens of thousands of dollars for the privilege of being locked in a cage. And I think we have a lot of work to do. What happens on our streets is not under control by any way, shape, or form. There's graffiti, there is, garbage and in the alleyways, etc. And, at any given time, there are certain times that I won't walk, to a few blocks even, just because of, having to walk through groups of individuals who are either doing drugs actively and openly, or are high and incapacitated. It's a very difficult situation, and there's compassion fatigue where everyone wants to see a solution and everyone wants to feel positive about the solution, but there's a certain amount where it's almost futility takes over and nihilism.
Yeah, we were downtown as well, and we couldn't continue downtown. We were right in the heart of it there, and we couldn't do interviews like this because the ambulance or the fire truck was there with sirens at least 4 or 5 times a day, and then the police were in our building a couple times a day getting footage from us, a staff being threatened to be stabbed, and then our accountant wouldn't walk to the bank. She didn't feel safe. And, we went through all this stuff. Somebody broke into our boardroom and I guess the word is, you can find it on YouTube, I think, sexually gratified themselves, and it was just made the females in our staff, most people, feel very, very unsafe. And then we had to lock it down and we had to do all these things. All those things are just added costs to the businesses that obviously you have to pass on to the consumer as well, right? So.
And that's all in addition to the EHT and the increase to CPP and the additional paid sick days and the new standards that have been introduced. I mean, businesses are crippled right now, and it's very difficult to see a way forward. So it's this is just something added to everyday life in living in some of our downtowns as a business.
And if you think about it, you and I both don't really do a lot of retail walk-in traffic, which is, easier to manage. Imagine the retail vendors downtown where your doors are open, there's tons of people coming and going all the time. And then, the customers are get driven away, all kinds of things from the amount of crime that goes on, right?
Yeah, and there's more and more security guards, right? Like more and more security guards standing at the doors, and you don't go to Esoterics or Lululemon without walking past a security guard. Yeah. They're standing there.
Eleanor Serco put out this tweet there saying another election promise there, Premier's election promise to have an education assistant in every elementary classroom. Instead, districts are being forced to cut teaching positions and programs. The NDP have run out of money and run out of ideas, I think.
It's scary. And this is an area that doesn't get a lot of attention. It doesn't get a lot of publicity. It doesn't hit the mainstream to the same extent. And it's one that the NDP have kind of gotten a free pass on because they did increase and do a lot of hiring initially. But like you said, they're out of money. They're not going to fund an increase, and this is an area that's going to get hit and hit hard. But it's also getting hit at a time where our population is increasing and where we have more kids. And I don't know if you saw the numbers, but even as English as a second language, I mean, we're seeing percentages that we've never seen before entering our school system. And so again, you're going to need more staff, not less, to actually, really deliver the standard of education that we want for all of our kids.
Yeah, I think, even the easy money that was coming when the Liberals are spending like drunken sailors, even that tap, because the provinces really have to borrow to get money. They don't get to create money like the Liberals do, where they use the Bank of Canada to create money. So they actually have to borrow it or do something to get it. But, the Liberal government would be less inclined to be giving away money because they've said they want to do some cuts. So where does the NDP go to get money? The only place they really have left is the taxpayer.
And the taxpayer is done. I mean, we're at 53% taxation right now. We've had 33 or 34 increases or new taxes under this government. I just don't see where they're going to get it from. I think they're tapped out. Where they should be focused right now is on the economy and on moving the economy forward. And right now, I just don't see anywhere that they are delivering that level of focus to really see us pushing forward and gaining in some corporate taxes.
I did an interview yesterday with Matt Hatfield from Open Media. and they're working on fighting Bill C-18. So I figured, well, I might as well interview the guy. And he said that, like democracy is really under threat with Bill C-18, and if we don't have a free and independent media now, I'll give you an example of this. Here, they did an interview with Chrystia Friedland yesterday, and she's talking about how steel is very special to her, and how we have to use steel in, in all our projects, and Canadian steel. And then the reporter asked the question in a very, very soft way, which is the question that demands to be answered. Why don't we recall the BC Ferry loan? The question was, how do we move forward and make sure that future deals are with Canadian steel? And of course, that's an easy answer, right? You're just like, well, we're going to do this and this and this. But a real reporter would have said, how are we going to get this back? Like we're giving money to China right now that just, I don't know if you watched the video today of China showing off its military, like one of the biggest military parades I've seen in a long time. And we're giving money to China. At the same time, China's crippling our canola industry. At the same time, they've been identified by Mark Carney as the biggest threat to Canada. And the reporter didn't ask the question that should be asked, because now the Liberals can use that excuse. We've already answered that question. Why don't they recall that loan?
And your point is well taken. Whether it's canola, whether it's steel, whether it's how our government's performing, we need a media that can dig, and we need a media that can ask the tough questions and can put our politicians and our businesses on pins and really demand some answers. And right now we do not have that. It's just, it is a very strange time in the market. And that's why, I tip my hat to journalists like Kim Bolin and Penny Daflos, who seem to be, really digging, and the Sam Coopers. And I know you've talked about my, my affinity for the work that he does in the past, but it's someone that's really digging. And thank you as well, Now Media, for just staying the course and really trying to find those stories that are interesting to viewers and that really will help spur the conversation on moving forward. Someone told me the other day, like, oh, I stumbled onto your podcast with Jim Check, and it was just awesome. So thanks for doing that. And I was like, just trying to make it relevant. Like what is the effect of politics on everyday life? And this is an area where C-18 has really affected people's lives, because it's affected what you can actually get access to in your home. I tried to post a global story the other day, and it's like, this is not available in your country. And I thought, oh yeah, right. That's why my feed is full of ads right now and not actually news.
So the other thing, what Bill C-18 did, it was cripples media. And then the government selectively decides who they want to fund, but they're crippled already. So that's why we don't getting real questions. And then the Liberals decide who gets to come and ask questions too. And it's just, they poke whatever they call Donald Trump a dictator and a threat to democracy. Will stand in front of reporters all day long and take questions from anybody. The Liberals won't do that. Ian and I work hard to try to get interviews with the Liberals and with the NDP here. It's been probably 4 or 5 emails to Terry Young's people to get an interview, and they keep telling me now. First they said he's not available, and then I said, I'm open anytime. I want to make this as easy as possible for you, so you can use my calendar, pick a date that works for you. And they're just like, oh, we'll take a look at it. And then I ask again, and then they're just like, oh, we're working on his schedule. I'm just like, come on, right? And then I can send it to the Conservatives, and I can send it to them, and they pick a time, and I get a thing booked immediately. And it's just, if the politicians won't allow people to ask questions, how will they ever be held accountable?
They won't be.
No, and that's sad. That's not a good place for democracy. And they also say, Trump is a threat to democracy. His government's in taking questions every day. 73 days our parliament's going to sit. 73 days. That's the basis of our democracy, is it not?
Yeah. It really is, and it is part of the way that the opposition parties can hold our government to account. U.S. and Canadian systems very different. Obviously, we're based on the U.K. system. The U.S. created their own, so they are a very different system. Their checks and balances come through what you're seeing right now, which is some of the executive orders that Trump has delivered are being taken to the justice system to say, is this legitimate? Is this lawful, or is it not? That's how their checks and balances work. work through the Congress and Senate, the president and the justice system. We don't have that same level of responsibility and accountability. And so our accountability comes through the adversarial system of an opposition party who will attempt to hold government to account and is given time in Parliament to do just that. But it's also done through the media, the press gallery, first and foremost, who had access. But now that the press gallery is so much more mobile, it's who gets invited to all of those different press conferences. And you're absolutely right. Like, we need to start seeing that open. We need to start seeing more transparency, and we need to start seeing our politicians answer the questions that are put in front of them.
Yeah, people need to demand that because, they get to hide that. So we've never seen media suppressed so much and basically at the begging bowl for government crumbs. It really puts them at a disadvantaged position when they have to beg for government money. And from one party, too. It's not because the Conservatives said no money. And then so the Liberals are doling out the crumbs so that the media is kind of subservient to them. And then also then not providing access and not sitting in Parliament. I mean, where's the real threat to democracy here? Like, where's the real threat?
No, you raise great questions, which is, how does this government actually expect to stay, accountable? I will say that, Carney has some work to do. This is going to be a tough session for him. If I was him, I would not be excited about it. He's going to, table his budget. That's going to be under huge amounts of scrutiny. He has to right the economic ship. I haven't seen any telegraphing of where that vision is going to go or where it's going to be. And he's, it's which is true, who he was when he wrote his book, Values, or who he was when he campaigned in this last election. So we're going to see a lot of things come to fruition. And if we don't get good answers, this government is in minority, and we could see that topple very quickly. Typical minority governments last 12 to 18 months and nothing more. And, this government doesn't have a coalition. There is no NDP right now. They're just starting their leadership. And speaking of starting their leadership race, only, under 50% can be cisgen males. And I find that very odd. And again, it's like, for a party that's trying not to be discriminatory, that certainly sounds discriminatory to me.
I was actually going to segue right into the NDP that basically have put Canada in that lost decade there. The dynamic duo of Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh have really kind of crippled Canada economically. And now they're running their leadership. They've gone from a $30,000 where you needed to put your name forward to $100,000, so more than tripled their entry fee. And then you have to get more than 50% of your 500 signatories from non-cis men. And then Robin Ernbach from the Globe and Mail put out a good piece and said, well, hopefully then they also say that you can't get your funding from non-cis men as well. The NDP, they basically, Jagmeet Singh obliterated that party to the benefit of the Liberals. I don't know if the Liberals tricked him into that or he just, his own ego did that, but he basically, Jack Layton would be rolling over in his grave there from what Jagmeet Singh did to that NDP party. Because who appeals to the NDP? Because it's definitely not the unions. The unions went to the Conservatives because the NDP abandoned the unions as well. Look in BC. Look at what they're doing here. They took that BC ferry deal, and they gave it to the Chinese, and then basically thumb their noses at the unions here in BC.
Yeah, I think that the NDP have a long road to find, where they actually stand. Speaking of the NDP here with the unions, yeah, they stumped their nose on the BC ship builders, but they also, they have a tough road ahead this fall with the BCGEU now on strike and more to come. They're in negotiation territory with no money. So it's going to be a very difficult road for them to climb and a very difficult a very difficult time. The teachers union has been another one that's been very faithful to them, the BCTF. And again, they're cutting jobs. They're not great working conditions. We have more portables than we've ever had before, despite Horgan promising that there would be no portables in Surrey. Now we've got double-decker portables where we're actually building 2-story portables for students to be housed in. And these are not great situations. They lack bathrooms. They lack certain ventilation systems. They're not to the same level that a normal building would be. So this is a government that has not had a tremendous amount of foresight. They have not managed the systems well, whether that's healthcare or education. And I think they've got some very stormy waters ahead. And, the unions that they have relied so heavily upon and have built so large, if they turn on this NDP, it's going to be a very different day.
Tomorrow, I have some really interesting interviews, and I know this one is going to interest you. Walter Gray is going to come in on his 85th birthday. He's got a book that his son has written, and we're gonna like talk about his book. But I mean, he was Kelowna's longest serving mayor. I think he had 2 terms, and then I think he lost to Sharon Shepherd, and then he came back and won, and then retired as mayor. A very well-respected man in the community.
Yeah, the great thing about, and I started development, land development under Walter Gray's tenure as mayor. And the one thing I would say about Walter is that he is a tremendous consensus builder. He really worked hard to understand each of his council members, to understand what was important to them, to build relationship with them, and then to really handle council as a collective. During his era, it was very clear what they were focused on and what they were going to bring forward to fruition. And we had some really exciting projects that came to be under his tenure. I would say that we haven't seen a mayor as skilled at that. There's been a lot of pushback, all of those voices should be independent, which is true, but they can do a lot of negotiation and navigation behind closed doors, almost like parents would, right? So it really gives the kids a united front. Sometimes it feels like we don't really have that united front with council. We're not actually sure, which way the wind's going to go and who's going to vote which way and what's forward. Are we for this or against this? What is the vision? And I think they've really struggled. Now, councils, to their credit, have been given a very hard lot in that, public hearings have been changed, and there's been a lot of really big sweeping changes that the province has made that to their power and to the amount that they actually get to weigh in. So sometimes when those moments come, they maybe take extra liberties in those situations. But I don't think that they've kind of found their way to the same extent that Walter really allowed Kelowna to surge. And you look at what Kelowna did economically under Walter Gray, and he was very, very successful.
Yeah, so if you have any questions for 11 o'clock, you can just send them to me, or you can actually watch online and shoot a question there, because I know that you know Walter very well. And also we have tomorrow Brennan Day, like I said, the health critic here in BC, which is going to be interesting as well. And then this one will be controversial. We have one of the lawyers in from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and they're going to talk about the COVID report that they dropped too, right? So that one might get us banned on YouTube. Who knows these days, right? But that's our show for today, though. We kept it at an hour, basically. And always great to have the discussion. I think people can learn a lot from watching this show. I think it's a great show. If I say so myself, I think the feedback I get for this show is been nothing short of amazing. So I do thank you for your time, for making yourself available, especially with all the experience and connections you have in BC politics and in Canadian politics as well. It's a pleasure to do the show with you.
Oh, it's an honor. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the listeners who have listened to us.
And if you can, share this far and wide so that we can get the message out there more and more. And you're not going to get this in most other outlets. So we do thank you for watching Now Media.